Some mysteries don't fade with time. They deepen across quiet towns, open seas, and empty skies. Ordinary moments have ended in silence, leaving behind questions no investigation has fully answered. These are cases where evidence stops, trails vanish, and certainty never arrives. Only echoes of what should have been simple days. Let's uncover 5 mysterious disappearance cases that still haunt investigators. Story 1. In the early hours of June 7th, 1992, a quiet residential street in Springfield, Missouri, became the center of one of America's most enduring mysteries. 3 women vanished from a modest home without signs of violence, noise, or urgency. What investigators found instead was a scene frozen in place, suggesting that whatever happened unfolded calmly, quickly, and without witnesses. Cheryl Elizabeth Levitt was a 47-year-old cosmetologist and devoted single mother, described as reliable and routine-oriented. Her daughter, Suzanne "Susie" Streeter, was 19, recently graduated from high school, artistic and close with friends. Stacy Kathleen McCall, 18, Susie's best friend, was responsible, punctual, and deeply trusted by her family. None of the 3 had histories suggesting they would leave voluntarily or disappear without contact. On June 6, 1992, Susie and Stacy celebrated their high school graduation, attending several parties before midnight. Originally planning to stay with a friend, they changed plans when the house became crowded and decided instead to go to Susie's home in 1717 East Delmar, where Cheryl was already inside. They were last seen around 2:15 a.m., driving toward the residence. The next morning, friends arrived expecting to leave together for a water park. The front door was unlocked. All 3 women's cars were parked outside. Inside were purses, money, keys, cigarettes, and clothing were neatly left behind. The family dog was present and agitated. A porch light globe was broken, but the bulb remained intact. There were no signs of forced entry or struggle. A friend answering the phone accidentally erased a strange message from the answering machine. One police officer later believed might have been a critical clue. By the time officers arrived, multiple well-meaning visitors had unknowingly disturbed the scene, complicating evidence collection. The disappearance window was narrowed to between 2:15 a.m. and 8 a.m., yet no witnesses reported screams, vehicles, or suspicious activity. Thousands of tips poured in over the years. Some investigators considered whether the women knew the person responsible, given the lack of chaos inside the home. Others questioned whether Susie and Stacy's unexpected change of plans placed them at the wrong place at the wrong time. Several individuals were examined, including convicted offenders and known criminals who lived or traveled through the area. In 1997, a convicted kidnapper claimed the women had been murdered and would never be found, but investigators publicly stated they did not find him credible. A later tip suggested the women were buried beneath a hospital parking garage, but authorities concluded there was insufficient evidence to excavate. Despite FBI involvement, extensive searches, and decades of review, no physical evidence has ever confirmed what happened inside that house. The case remains open and continues to haunt investigators who admit that its silence is what makes it so disturbing. Families were left without answers, milestones, or closure. Scheduled work shifts were missed. Appointments went unattended. Over time, the women were declared legally dead, though officially still listed as missing. Their loved ones have lived with unanswered questions for more than 3 decades, while investigators still receive tips, hoping one might finally explain what has resisted resolution for so long. What if the erased message held the only voice of the person who knew what happened that night? What if the calm inside the house was the most important clue that investigators have been unable to explain? Story 2. In December of 1900, a lighthouse on a remote cluster of islands off the northwest coast of Scotland went dark without warning. For days, no light cut through the Atlantic night. When a relief ship finally reached the island after Christmas, the crew found something far more sinister than storm damage or any mechanical failure. The lighthouse was intact, the lamps were prepared, the door was ajar, and the 3 men assigned to keep the light burning had vanished without a trace. More than a century later, the disappearance of the Flannan Isles lighthouse keepers still haunts maritime historians and investigators alike. The Flannan Isles lie more than 20 miles west of the Isle of Lewis, battered constantly by wind and violent seas. The lighthouse, built only a year earlier, stood atop a 200-foot cliff on Island Moor, the largest of the islands. It was designed to withstand extreme conditions, flashing twice every 30 seconds to guide ships through dangerous waters. Assigned to this isolated outpost were 3 experienced keepers: James Duckett, the principal keeper and a veteran of lighthouse service; Thomas Marshall, a former seaman and assistant keeper; and Donald MacArthur, an occasional keeper temporarily filling in for a sick colleague. All were familiar with isolation, danger, and harsh weather. On December 15, 1900, a passing ship noted the lighthouse was not lit, though the report was delayed. Severe storms prevented immediate access to the island. When the lighthouse tender Hesperus arrived on December 26th, no flag was flying, and no one responded to signal rockets or the ship's horn. Relief keeper Joseph Moore was sent ashore. Inside the lighthouse, he found an eerie stillness. The lamps had been cleaned and filled, the machinery maintained, and the kitchen left orderly. An unfinished meal remained untouched. 2 sets of oilskins and sea boots were missing, while 1 set remained behind. The logbook showed normal entries up to December 13th, with weather notes from the morning of December 15th written on a slate, suggesting routine duties had been completed that day. A survey of the island revealed violent storm damage near the western landing. Iron railings were twisted, a lifebuoy had been torn from its mountings more than 100 feet above sea level, and a massive stone weighing over a ton had been displaced. Investigators concluded the men likely left the lighthouse to inspect damage and were caught by a sudden rogue wave swept into the sea. Yet troubling details complicate this explanation. Lighthouse regulations required at least 1 keeper to remain inside at all times. An overturned chair inside suggested urgency, yet the outer doors and gates had been carefully closed. 1 man appeared to have rushed out without his weather gear, an uncharacteristic act in freezing December conditions. Alternative theories, ranging from a violent argument to psychological strain, have never been proven, but neither has the official explanation answered every question. The bodies of James Duckett, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur were never recovered. Official records list their cause of death as probably drowning, a conclusion that allowed pensions to be paid but offered no certainty. Ducat left behind a wife and 4 children. Marshall's family mourned without answers. MacArthur's surviving relatives were scarcely documented at all. Over the decades, poems, books, and films have immortalized the mystery, transforming a tragic loss into an enduring legend. What could force 3 seasoned keepers to abandon their posts at once? Was it nature alone, or a final, unseen moment of chaos? Story 3. On September 5, 2012, a quiet alpine road near the village of Chevaline, south of Lake Annecy, became the scene of sudden and brutal violence. In a secluded forest lay-by, gunfire shattered the stillness of a place known for its beauty and isolation. When police arrived, they found multiple victims, an idling vehicle, scattered shell casings, and no sign of the shooter. Despite an immediate international investigation, the motive was unclear. The killer unseen, and the crime scene offered more questions than answers. Among the victims was Saad al-Hili, a 50-year-old British-Iraqi engineer from Surrey, visiting the region on holiday with his family. His wife, Iqbal al-Hili, 47, and her mother, Suhaila al-Alaf, 74, had traveled with him. They were accompanied by their 2 young daughters, aged 7 and 4, while another victim, Sylvain Mollier, a 45-year-old French cyclist whose local factory worker, married with children, regularly rode the forest routes near Chevaline. The victims had no known connection to one another and no known enemies. That afternoon, the al-Hili family drove their British-registered BMW estate up a forest road that ended at a small parking area. Mollier arrived by bicycle around the same time. Moments later, a gunman opened fire. Ballistics later confirmed that a single 7.65mm semi-automatic pistol was used, discharging at least 25 rounds. Al-Hili attempted to reverse his car to escape, but became trapped in soft ground. All 4 adults were shot multiple times in the head. The family's 7-year-old daughter was shot and beaten, but survived, while her 4-year-old sister hid beneath her mother's body for nearly 8 hours before being discovered. The shooter fled without taking valuables, leaving behind chaos and silence. French and British investigators launched a massive inquiry, examining family disputes, possible financial motives, and the idea of a professional hit. These theories persisted despite evidence suggesting a chaotic and uncoordinated attack. The use of a vintage Swiss model Luger pistol, the lack of escape planning, and the failure to secure the scene pointed away from a contract killing. Mollier was initially considered a potential target due to the number of shots he sustained, yet no motive was ever established. Over the years, attention shifted toward the possibility of a random or opportunistic attacker familiar with the area. In recent years, France's National Cold Case Unit ordered new DNA testing on cigarette butts, gun fragments, and victims' clothing, underscoring that investigators still believe the case is solvable. The surviving children were returned to the UK under protective care, growing up with limited public knowledge of the events that took their family. Relatives of both the al-Hili family and Sylvain Mollier have endured years of speculation, media attention, and unfulfilled promises of answers. Floral tributes continue to appear at the site, and anniversaries renew calls for justice. Despite shifting theories and renewed forensic efforts, families remain trapped in uncertainty, waiting for clarity that has never arrived. What if the victims were chosen simply because they stopped in the wrong place at the wrong time? What if the truth lies not in complex motives, but in a moment of random violence that left no witnesses behind? Story 4. On a calm December morning in 1872, a ship drifted silently through the Atlantic Ocean near the Azores, her sails still raised, her course steady, and her deck eerily empty. The brigantine Mary Celeste appeared undamaged as she cut through the water, yet no crew answered when another vessel approached. There were no distress flags, no signs of struggle, and no indication of chaos. Everything about the scene suggested routine maritime travel, except for the complete absence of life aboard. What greeted the boarding crew would become one of the most enduring maritime mysteries in history, a case that still unsettles investigators more than a century later. The Mary Celeste had departed New York on November 7, 1872, bound for Genoa, Italy. She was commanded by Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs, a 37-year-old experienced seaman known for his disciplined faith and careful navigation. Traveling with him were his wife, Sarah, and their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia, along with 7 seasoned crew members. Briggs was considered cautious and reliable, not prone to reckless decisions. The vessel carried over 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol, along with sufficient food and water to last several months. Nothing in the captain's background or the crew's history suggested unrest, fear, or instability. On December 5th, the British brig Dei Gratia encountered the Mary Celeste drifting roughly 400 miles east of the Azores. When boarded, the ship was found in working order. The cargo remained intact. Personal belongings were untouched. The last log entry, dated November 25th, placed the ship near the Azores, yet 10 days had passed without explanation. The only major items missing were the lifeboat and navigational instruments. There were no signs of violence, no damage consistent with a storm, and no indication of panic. The vessel had seemingly continued sailing on its own long after its crew vanished. An official inquiry ruled out piracy and mutiny as valuables and cargo were left behind. Some investigators proposed that fumes from leaking alcohol barrels may have caused fear of an explosion, prompting the crew to evacuate temporarily. Others believed a faulty chronometer or misjudged weather conditions led Captain Briggs to abandon ship out of caution. More speculative ideas, rogue waves, seaquakes, or supernatural forces were widely discussed but never substantiated. No theory fully explains why an experienced crew would leave a seaworthy vessel with supplies intact. The lack of physical evidence continues to frustrate historians and maritime investigators alike. For the families of those aboard, the disappearance offered no closure. Only silence. No remains were ever recovered. No final message delivered. The Briggs family, in particular, was left to reconcile how a careful captain and his young family could vanish without a trace. Over time, Mary Celeste became a symbol of unresolved loss. The ship itself was later salvaged and eventually wrecked, but the questions followed it into history. Even today, researchers revisit the case, hoping new insight might finally explain what happened. What circumstance could drive an experienced captain to abandon a stable ship at sea? And what truth remains hidden beneath the waves, still haunting investigators today? Story 5. In the early hours of March 8, 2014, a commercial airliner lifted off from Kuala Lumpur bound for Beijing and vanished without warning. There was no distress call, no explosion, no mayday, only silence. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 disappeared from radar less than an hour after takeoff, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. What should have been an ordinary overnight flight became one of aviation's greatest mysteries. One that continues to trouble investigators, experts, and families more than a decade later. Flight MH370 was piloted by Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, a veteran with more than 18,000 flight hours, and First Officer Fariq Abdul Hamid, a young but fully certified co-pilot nearing the completion of his training. On board were 227 passengers from 14 different countries and 12 crew members. Families, tourists, business travelers, and children filled the cabin, many heading home or beginning long-awaited trips. The Boeing 777 itself had a strong safety record and had passed all routine maintenance checks. Nothing about the crew, the passengers, or the aircraft suggested danger or distress. The flight departed just after midnight, At 1:19 a.m., the cockpit made its final radio contact. "Good night, Malaysian 370. Minutes later, the aircraft's transponder was switched off. Military radar later revealed the plane made a sharp turn back across Malaysia, flying west into the Andaman Sea. Satellite data showed the aircraft continued flying for nearly 6 more hours, long after all contact was lost. At 8:19 a.m., the final automated signal was received. The plane was never heard from again. No emergency calls were made. No wreckage was immediately found. The aircraft simply vanished. An international search spanning more than 120,000 square kilometers of ocean followed, becoming the most expensive aviation search in history, despite years of sonar scans, satellite analysis, and underwater exploration. Only scattered debris was recovered along distant shorelines. Investigators confirmed the aircraft likely crashed in the southern Indian Ocean, but the main wreckage has never been located. Evidence suggested the plane was deliberately diverted, yet no definitive cause was identified. Theories range from mechanical failure and depressurization to intentional human action. Officials have acknowledged that the aircraft's controls were likely manipulated, but who did so and why remains unknown. The lack of physical evidence has left investigators unable to close the case. For families, the absence of answers has been devastating. With no bodies recovered and no confirmed crash site, many were denied the chance to grieve properly. Vigils were held across the world as relatives pleaded for transparency and continued searches. Some families still gather each year, holding photographs and memories of loved ones lost to uncertainty. Investigators have admitted the case continues to weigh heavily on them, describing MH370 as one of the most haunting and unresolved tragedies in aviation history. Despite renewed searches announced in recent years, including advanced seabed mapping and autonomous underwater vehicles, progress has remained slow and uncertain. Each new effort raises hope, only to end in frustration when no trace is found. Investigators have stated that until the main wreckage is located, critical questions about the aircraft's final moments may never be answered. The case continues to influence global aviation policy, changing how aircraft are tracked, yet the core mystery remains unsolved. The silence still echoes today. What truly happened in the cockpit after the final transmission? And will the fate of Flight MH370 ever be fully revealed or remain lost beneath the ocean forever? Years have passed, evidence has been studied, and theories have come and gone. Yet these cases remain frozen in uncertainty, from vanished families to silent lighthouses, abandoned ships, and flights that never returned. Each story leaves behind the same unsettling truth. Some answers may never be found, and until they are, these mysteries continue to linger, quietly haunting those who still search for the truth. This is Vanished Stories, where the missing are never forgotten.